Welcome to another episode of Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. On this show, we meet artists transforming lives with their work. What do you think of when you hear the term psychedelic drugs? Do you picture the scene from Easy Rider where everyone is having the wild, horrible acid trip in the cemetery? I remember my mom warning me when I was young to never set my drink down at a party because someone might slip some acid into it. I was in early elementary school at the time, so I was less alarmed about having an unanticipated acid trip than I was worried about which of my 6- and 7-year-old friends might be putting things into my drink. Flash forward about 15 or so years later, I was walking with a friend through the Mission District in San Francisco. We had just eaten at a taqueria, and I was carrying a bag with an extra burrito I had ordered for dinner later. As we walked back towards my apartment, an elderly woman was approaching us on the sidewalk. She was in very bad shape, long, disheveled hair and clothing. As she passed people on the sidewalk, she was calling out, "Help me, help me." She was definitely suffering from neglect, probably homelessness, and possibly mental illness as well. Before I knew it, she and I were standing facing each other on the sidewalk. Our faces were less than a foot apart, and I had taken both of her hands in mine. I remember her looking at me through watering eyes, and she said, "Can you help me? I'm so hungry." Of course I could help her. I had this extra food. I gave her my burrito, which she took to a nearby bench and sat down to eat. Do you feel like you have to shut down some of your humanity when you walk down an urban street? I do. There's so many people suffering from homelessness, untreated mental illness, and addiction on our streets. I get overwhelmed with feelings sometimes, guilt, sadness, and sometimes fear. I often just pass by, offering up a quick Om Mani Padme Hum as I pass, really just feeling helpless to know how to help in that moment. So what was different about that day when I was able to stop and connect for just that moment with the elderly woman on the street? My friend and I had taken mushrooms about an hour before. Instead of feeling paralyzed by negative emotions, I was able to feel what I think I was meant to feel: empathy. I've never forgotten that experience. On June 1st, the California Senate passed a bill that would legalize the possession and sharing of psychedelic drugs in the state. It's not law yet. It would still have to be passed by the House. A friend and colleague of mine, documentary filmmaker Marjorie Sturm, has been creating PSAs on behalf of Decriminalize Nature SF, an organization which seeks the decriminalization of many plants, including psilocybin mushrooms. I've asked her to come on the show today to share what led her to get involved in this campaign and how this topic overlaps with her documentary film work. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. You can get more information about this podcast and get in touch with me on the Facebook page, Art Heals All Wounds, and on Twitter and Instagram at Art Heals Podcast. Up next, our deep dive with this episode's guest on Art Heals All Wounds. My guest on this episode, Marjorie Sturm, is a filmmaker based in San Francisco, California. Marjorie and I went to the same film program, but we weren't in the same cohort. I didn't see any of her work until I saw the 2014 film, The Cult of J.T. Leroy, her masterpiece examination of the literary scam perpetrated by Laura Albert when she impersonated a teenage trans sex worker in order to pass her fiction off as memoirs of the non-existent J.T. Leroy. Literary agents, publishers, artists, celebrities, and ordinary people were taken in by the scam, resulting in book deals, movie options, and donations of money and time to a young person who had purportedly been sexually exploited by his mother and other adults, working as a sex worker as a teenager, and eventually becoming HIV positive. The story captured the imagination of so many, and the gifts poured in, all for the sake of someone who wasn't real. And all for the enrichment of the middle-aged Laura Albert, who allegedly pursued this fraud out of bitterness of not securing a publishing deal for herself. I could spend the entire episode talking about what Marjorie went through to make this film. What I will say is that I left the screening of the film with the conviction that my former classmate had the most integrity of any filmmaker I knew. Her film not only insisted that we hold Laura Albert accountable, but it also held a mirror up to all of us, demanding that we examine our fetishization of violence and exploitation that made this literary hoax so easy to pull off. Lately, Marjorie has been lending her talent to the movement to decriminalize psychedelic drugs in the state of California by creating PSAs for an organization called Decriminalize Nature. Because I know that Marjorie operates from such a steady moral compass, I've been wanting to ask her about what attracted her to this campaign and also how this overlaps with her own work as a documentary filmmaker. Marjorie, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Before we get too far into what I want to talk to you about today, can you just give me background on what you do?
Sure. I'm a filmmaker in San Francisco. I work mostly in documentary, but I've also worked a bit in experimental and a little bit of narrative. And yeah, that's what I'm up to.
I want to talk to you about your documentary film work, but the reason I wanted to have you on the show right now is because I've noticed that you've been creating PSAs for the decriminalized psychedelic drugs movement here in California. And that has been in the news recently because the Senate just passed a bill which is taking this one step closer to happening. Can you talk a little bit about that bill if you know about it?
Sure. Yes. So that's what that it is really surprising and really exciting. It's Bill SB 519. And, the group I've been working with is called Decriminalize Nature San Francisco. And it's an offshoot of the movement out of Oakland that was successful to decriminalize plant-based medicine. But this is a bill that actually takes it even a lot further than we were even expecting, because we've been trying to do in San Francisco what they successfully did in Oakland, which is, to get a supervisor on board and that there'd be a resolution that, that it's, a low priority, that, no one's going to prosecute for using plant-based medicine. And what this bill does is actually decriminalize and potentially legalize all psychedelics in California. Wow. And so it cleared all the committees, it cleared the Senate, and now it looks to go vote in the Assembly, and it looks like it will pass. Like it's going, the Assembly has more Democrats on it. It's considered less conservative. Mm-hmm. So the Senate, which was really close, it was like one vote, so it looks like this is going to be, it's a huge, huge thing for California. And there's been a lot of different people working on it. Like it's the Decriminalize Nature movement, but there's also, MAPS and a lot of other components. Veterans have been working on it, and just, Drug Policy Alliance, people who were just interested in these issues really a long time because of the war on drugs. Mm. So it's just this idea, especially, with the state of mental health the way it is, the state of opioid addictions, that we really aren't in a position to turn down possible treatments that are being successful for people. So so that's a little bit, I'm quite honestly really amazed that it went through, because we weren't really having that much success on a local level in San Francisco. So then the fact that it just could clear all of California, and we didn't have to, get petitions going, or you just realize, who we vote in and is so important, because it just saved like the activist community a ton of work. I mean, there'll probably be other struggles ahead that I just don't know about at the moment. But anyway, that's a little bit about it. I mean,
wow. Well, I'm just so curious. You talk about some of these potential benefits. I mean, certainly people have found benefits with medical marijuana. I am really interested a little bit in this distinction between the plant-based medicine and psychedelics, because obviously plant-based medicines does not include all the psychedelics that are potentially going to be legalized. But I think I might put that question on pause and just really get a little bit more about the idea of the possible benefits. You talked about opioid addiction and mental health. So what are some of the possible benefits, particularly from plant-based psychedelics, such as mushrooms and whatever else is out there? I don't even really know.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. Because, I think, the plant-based medicine, I mean, it kind of meets you where you're at, you know what I mean? Because it's a little bit like when with the medical marijuana, like they were using it for, from back pains to stress to anxiety. I mean, like it was almost like if you have a condition, it could potentially be helpful. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I think there's a lot of emphasis on psilocybin mushrooms, because that's more accessible. But for addiction, ibogaine seems to be really, really powerful and really helpful for people. That's, and I don't know that much about it. I've never tried it or
what
anything.
Is the name of it?
Ibogaine.
Okay.
And I think it's a root from Africa. Mm. So I mean, that's the thing that's interesting, is that people have been using these plant-based medicines around the globe for centuries, successfully in all sorts of, mostly ceremonial, or, with a curandera, a doctor of some sort that they would go to. But I mean, people have been using them for addiction, but also like veterans with PTSD. There's been studies, about, how helpful that is. And that's been someone I know. The veteran community has been really active in promoting this bill, SB 519, too, because it's been really helping veterans. And then there's people, metaphorically, there's a lot of veterans in our society from the war on drugs or, poverty, or however, our culture is not always benign. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of people in different circumstances that could potentially benefit. Just, even, people with, all sorts of troubled backgrounds that, might otherwise be functioning well, can function better. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies, has had a program where they've been like certifying people to be sort of facilitators for a while. So, the people in, sort of non-traditional communities in the psychological fields have been working, underground mm-hmm. for a while, mm-hmm. with these medicines.
That's really fascinating. One thing I'm wondering is, what made you want to get involved in this movement?
That's a good question and a big question. It's interesting because I used, like in college, mushrooms, and they were incredibly helpful. Like I definitely think they just aligned me with my life and my purpose. And I don't think I was suffering from anything specific, just, general dissociation that we all do, or we're just like on a track and we've been on this sort of conveyor belt, from kindergarten, and you're in college, and it's hard to know, what your goals are, really, divorced from, the pressures of society or your parents. And I mean, and I don't think you ever actually do separate them, but you can come to better understanding right. of what your true desires are. So, I mean, I had those early experiences that were, really interesting to me. And then in the late 90s, 1997 and 2002, I went down to Huautla de Jimenez and did 2 ceremonies with the Mazatecs, with a curandera there. Mm. And so,
and I filmed those experiences. This is in Mexico?
Mm-hmm, in the mountains of Oaxaca. Okay. Exactly. And so I went before film school and after film school. And And so I have this footage, which is almost like now archival footage of these experiences there. And I remember just being sort of shocked and just like, moved to my bone that this was part of their culture, that this wasn't anything they were paranoid about, or they didn't have this like persecution complex. That's a big part of the experience in the United States, that you're doing something illegal and how that illegality affects you mentally, when you're trying to do something potentially healing. And also the fact that I was just moved that, the context that I would be doing them, wandering around in a parking lot, after a Grateful Dead show or something, just like unsafe environments really too. When I think about it, like I remember being at Hippie Hill in Golden Gate Park and like listening to someone have like a psychotic break about, 6 feet from me, just not, and just very little information on how to do proper set and setting, relatively speaking, to now what's going on.
Right.
So anyway, that's the backdrop. And then I've been kind of thinking about this film and how I would put it together on a modern, like now, if I was to re-engage with it
you're talking about this footage that you shot when you were in Mexico. Yes.
Exactly. So then I've been thinking about trying to make it like use it somehow. And I went to the conference in Oakland in 2017, and, it was interesting, but, compared to issues around being evicted, I was like, what do psychedelics mean while I'm getting evicted? But in the beginning,
wait, you got to stop. So you're talking about you went to the Decriminalize Nature conference.
The psychedelic conference in Oakland.
Okay. But
I'm sorry.
But during this time, you were also being evicted?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that was really stunning. Like it just felt, and there's a lot of things. I mean, one could argue, all of lots of healing modalities.
Right. I just want to explain to people who aren't from the Bay Area, being evicted is one of the worst things that can happen to you because there's so little housing and it's so incredibly expensive. And it is almost like a sentence of saying you just have to leave here or you're going to not have housing. So
it was terrorizing.
I want to make that really clear what a very big deal it is. It's your worst nightmare is to be evicted. Okay.
Yeah. And there seriously was nothing in the greater Bay Area. Like we were looking at Vermont, just there was nothing. And that just a big uprooting and so forth. And even Vermont, we'd be moving there without jobs or anything. There's just nothing.
And you have children.
I have 2 kids who are like walking distance to their schools as we are now. Like the whole thing was just, and it went on for a while, a couple of years. It was pretty distracting, just not the unknown, the uncertainty. I mean, maybe that's a great time to do psychedelics, one could argue, right? But I remember just being like, you just realize it's that it comes up Abraham Maslow's like hierarchy of needs people discuss. But if you don't have your basic needs met, like working on any issues, it can feel recreational comparatively or so forth. So I was in that headspace when I was going to this conference, but I was still kind of working and gathering and trying to just try to figure out a structure for this old footage or think about it. And then in the beginning of COVID, I got an email from a petition I had just signed about decriminalizing in San Francisco to go to a Zoom call. And so it's been about since COVID that I started working with this group of people once a week on, local issues, basically. And, we've been sort of calling our group Decrim San Francisco because we're kind of also interested in like decriminalization issues, maybe of prostitution and, just other like a broader thing than just maybe even nature is up. And it was discussed. I don't know where everyone's at now, but that was one of the discussions. So anyway, this is this sort of activist group that I've just tapped into, and it's been interesting. It's been super kind of fun and mellow. It's not, sometimes activist circles are a harder edged group, but this is a pretty soft edged group, you know.
How did they find out that you were a filmmaker and would be a great person to create these PSAs for them? Did that come up right away, or what happened?
It didn't come out right away, but it was like sort of like a tapping into like, well, what's your skill set? What's your skill set? And you know, and you realize like a lot of it's about communication and education. So I offered, and you know, so I just offered to start documenting people
Mm.
who were willing. A lot of people aren't willing, but a number of people were, and now people are more and more willing, it seems. So yes, I just started, and it was hard during COVID, you know, to meet as well and shoot. But now it's really picking up more because it's just easier, you know, because just always shooting outdoors, depending on the weather and the wind and all that, is tricky.
Right.
So yeah, so I just started kind of dual purpose to do these, like I'm making these like quick PSAs or like, you know, 2 to 4 minutes, and then asking if, I mean, I don't know, again, because until I structure it completely to be able to use it in a feature documentary.
Okay. So when you say that you're documenting people, these are people who have some sort of practice with psychedelics.
Yeah. So the people I've documented, one's like a UCSF researcher who on psychedelics, and one owns a storefront in San Francisco where it's all about just plant medicine and mushrooms in general, mostly just mushrooms, but like turkey tail and different types of mushrooms, but also psilocybin mushrooms that he's focusing on different, you know, medicinal properties of mushrooms, which is just interesting in general. And there definitely is a movement behind that too, that my son has made me aware of, that people are really taking mushroom capsules and mushroom teas, and that mushrooms in general just do amazing things, you know, for your mind and elasticity and stuff, or neuroplasticity is, I guess, the term people are using. Just they're anti-cancer, from reishi to turkey, all this. So anyway, I've been learning a little bit about that, not much. But then I also interviewed 2 people on the board of Decriminalize Nature from Oakland. And I have another one of those lined up. And then I did a transpersonal psychologist. I interviewed her. She's someone who helps people integrate these experiences or prepare people for these experiences. And that was pretty fascinating. And then I did do someone who also is sort of like a cultivator of, you know, plant-based medicines, and sort of an underground practitioner came up that he leads people or helps them create safe settings and kind of helps guide. I didn't know what exactly he was up to. I knew he was a cultivator, but he does seem to like go to people's environments or invite them into his own environment and sets up the space for them as well.
Well, this is fascinating because you talked a little bit about comparing your experiences of doing psychedelics like mushrooms or something here in the US and then doing them in Mexico where it was not illegal as part of the culture. Can you talk a little bit more about how it was used when you did this in Mexico? Was it some sort of cultural ritual? Was it for healing purposes? Was it both?
Yeah, it's interesting. They use it for healing, and they definitely, there is a stress on, you know, it can cure bodily ailments. Like they do feel like you're getting out, you know, some sort of sicknesses, but also for your mental health, they call it like cleaning your system. And it was really interesting because it was the first, because I've done it twice, and it once with one Curandera and then her daughter the next time the mother wasn't there. But they do it very simply at night, just like a little tin roof hut, basically, with blankets and mattresses. And they always do it at night, and you kind of just curl up with these blankets, and they give you the little mushrooms and you eat them, and they have, you know, songs that they might sing and some incense and, you know, some candles. And then they have, it's a hybrid religion with Catholicism. So they still have like, some Jesus, statues or paintings with all sorts of flowers, just like a sort of an altar space, I guess, that they're in front of. And, throughout the ritual, you might hear your name a couple of times, that she's blessing you or protecting you. But other than that, like the majority of it is just, laying on your back with a blanket on you and wherever your mind takes you. And I mean, that was just really different than my experience here, where, you might be wandering the park and going to the ocean, or, sometimes, to its benefit, just having a good conversation with a friend or so forth, that's also of value, just processing something with friends or so. But it was very interesting. It felt really safe and simple, in that setting sort of situation. Yeah. And the interesting thing with that was the first time I met someone who was a Mazatec, I said to him, so have you done the mushrooms? And he said, yes, I have, just once with my whole family. And I thought that was just incredible, because I couldn't imagine for the life of me doing them once with my whole family. That would just be really interesting,
Yeah, I can't really, I'm trying to picture that with my family as well.
Right. Crazy, right? So, but now it's just interesting. You just realize there is more of that now with younger people.
Right.
I think that as I've been following along, with the new generation, like people in their 20s and 30s and psychologists now, they are reaching out to that kind of parental divide. I mean, sometimes I think it's like even an East Coast, West Coast divide that exists to a certain extent. And I see that it's changing, it's shifting. It's interesting. Like the taboo is lifting, and the stigma is definitely lifting.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So can you talk more about this film that you're making? It sounds like the seed was this archival footage, and maybe the decriminalization is maybe at the other end. What's happening with the rest of the film, if you don't mind talking about it?
No. I'm hoping, till something's done, you're always like hoping like it is what you're imagining, or it's going to come together exactly. But I am like 40 minutes into a rough cut. So I think, and then I might change it again, obviously. But what I'm looking at is the issues around transitions and anxieties, basically. The working title is called Small Deaths. So these near death experiences, or like these awakening experiences. I'm looking at, just like having my children, the eviction, these different events that took place, and, these feelings around, anxiety, I guess, and how to navigate through big events that wake you up, and what you learn from them, and how much in life is just also destiny. There's that question, of what is fated and what's free will. And they use them for that as well. The Mazatecs, they use them for divinatory purposes. And that's always been something I'm interested in too, because I do tarot cards. So I'm kind of dealing with, a lot of the stuff I documented along the way. I just have been documenting my life pretty actively always. Not everyone does that. It's a little nuts, but I do document a lot of my life. And I've been a pretty manic journal writer as well.
Are you going to talk a bit about the eviction in there as well?
Yeah.
Is that, yes?
Yeah, so I deal with the eviction, the transition to being a mother, a near drowning experience of a friend. So these different little events. I mean, so it's kind of an essay film, kind of a memoir film. I'm not really sure exactly until
I love it.
But I think it's ending on this COVID experience.
Ah, interesting.
Which is like I think this is like it is a really interesting thing, the COVID thing, this transition, this anxiety. It was almost psychedelic in and of itself, just that people had to go inside themselves and look at themselves and sort of reset themselves and sort of, it's like, if you ever wanted that chance to go to a Zen monastery, you had it, So
right.
It definitely, I think, pushed people psychologically all over the place, really, right?
Right. Most definitely.
It was a big reset for a lot of people, but, also a dark night of the soul, going through looking, there's a lot of people suffering from addictions and mental health issues come up too when you strip everyone.
Right.
We're not really meant to be islands,
No, we're not. And there are definitely some ways that I hope as a society will reset, but it remains to be seen if that's going to happen. I think as individuals, we were forced to reset, but a lot of the structural things that maybe also needed to reset didn't. And that's an interesting contradiction there for us all to be living with as well.
Totally. But I do think maybe this SB 519 bill is coming out of COVID. Like, I think we're at even the legislators know that we're at like a dead end, like that,
in terms of like the war on drugs and things like that.
Yeah. And even like antidepressants aren't really working. We don't really have addiction treatment. Like we're really not in a position to turn down possibilities for people to heal. And it's definitely not like everyone's medicine, and everyone shouldn't do it. It's not like something that can cure everyone necessarily. And people may not want to, but the people who want to should have access, and they should have informed access. And, it has a lot of potentiality for, all sorts of good things. But I think that's out of COVID, that it's just, people are willing to sort of take a chance a little more.
That's such a good point. You said that you're in the editing process of this film. Do you have a timeline in mind, or are you just letting it happen as it happens?
I really feel like the good thing with doing these PSAs is it really gets me in touch with the footage of these interviews. So, and I've never done this before, but I really enjoy that dual purpose of and that kind of immediate satisfaction of just releasing something and making these sort of short documentary pieces, 2 to 4 minutes, that you just kind of put out there. And then I mean, a lot of the interviews are an hour long, so I could be, extracting from a lot of other parts. So, I mean, I feel like if I can, just stay the course, I would love to have the final cut by the end of the summer. That would be my goal. And and then, then maybe have people watch it and then take feedback and then change it. And maybe, who knows, it could look a lot different,
Right.
But that would be my goal. And I see it as just sort of a short feature about an hour and 10 minutes. So it's at 40 minutes. So I think this last part could be like another 20, 30 minutes.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to see it. I loved your previous film, The Cult of J.T. Leroy. To me, it's a classic that everybody should see. So I'm very excited to see this one when you come out of it or when you finish it.
I remember thinking I didn't know if I could find something crazier or weirder than that. And then I'm like, oh, wow, this is getting I think this is pretty crazy too. Or going some places as well.
Right. But the thing about The Cult of J.T. Leroy, if people haven't seen it, it is about, and I'm totally blanking on her name. What's about?
That's okay.
Okay, yeah.
Laura Albert.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah.
You can blank it.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know if I want to give any more energy to her.
Right.
But if you have any interest in literary fraud in general, you should watch The Cult of J.T. Leroy. It's wonderful. But what I will say about this film that you're describing is that the energy sounds completely different for you as a filmmaker. I can imagine that The Cult of J.T. Leroy was probably not a fun film to make because it's about fraud. And
Totally.
and on a
It's
very
a dark part of human nature,
yeah,
for sure.
a very deep level of fraud, not just like, hey, I stole your money, but I stole a lot more from you than your money. But this, I love that it's personal, and I love that it is about dealing with stressful transitions, but it does sound like ultimately there are aspects of healing in the film.
Exactly. It's really, and on that level, it's polar opposite.
Yeah.
And that's why it's just been, it's been super pleasant to work on.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like everything's just been kind of easy and pleasant as opposed to not.
Yes.
Like because I think it really took me a while to look at, like, to really get that and understand that I think I needed to look at it, people's willingness to really hurt and exploit people. I think we need to look at that more, like at that raw ability to, take advantage of people, as opposed to, I think working in social work for so many years.
Oh, you worked in social work?
Yeah, I worked in drug rehabilitation too. So that was my background as well. I worked in social work before film school and all throughout film school.
Wow. That gives me such insight into the cult of JT Leroy and also this film. Yeah. One question I have is, what is it like to make a film that is personal? It's about yourself. It's about your journey. It's about your family. What is that like?
It's really scary and very, very strange and very, it's really just like you sort of have to leap out of it in this weird way and almost have to watch it objectively. And I think that's what makes it somewhat kind of healing, or that's how you process these emotions and you process these events that might in your own memory have been distorted in a way or been made scarier or worse. And then you watch the footage kind of calmly, and it loses its impact as you watch it over and over again. And you things that might have upset you at first upset you less. And I think that's maybe one aspect on a personal level that's good. And then, but I mean, honestly, when you make a personal film, you hope that it's going to appeal to people more than just yourself, that somehow that the personal, if not universal, because I think that's a stretch, it may not be universal, your story, but if you, that at least that it overlaps with other people's experiences as well. So, I mean, you just begin to realize, I think with the personal film, I realized that, I'm not that unique. You know what I mean? Like anything I've gone through, the struggles I've gone through, other people are going through too. And I just happen, to be filming a lot. I filmed these experiences at the time. And I think I do it at the time. It's a way of feeling like you're controlling your time. It's a way of kind of helping process these experiences. And like, I just remember when people were coming to look at the apartment because they were interested in buying it, I was like, I'm going to film them. And it felt like something I could do instead of just sitting there and like having people roam around your apartment, not knowing if you're going to get evicted or not. Right. Like I bear witness, so there's a way that it keeps you present, I think, in your own life to bear witness while it's happening. And then it helps you process it later. I think it's similar to rereading a journal too, but I don't think I've published my journals, and that's the difference there. You know what I mean? But I've been always a journal writer. So I think it was an easy transition into making a personal film. I did one other personal film at one point called Honey and Eggs. And I think after you make one personal film, you think you'll never do it again. Right. And then this one, I do have talking heads. So it's not entirely personal, this one. So I feel like it buffers it, a little bit.
Okay.
I can't imagine making a film like 100% about me. That just wouldn't be my style. But, I'm in this one a lot more, obviously. So are other people that I know and so forth. I think making it is a lot of fun. I think the question really is what will it be like to show it? And I think that could be less like,
that's always the question.
It's always the question, right? So I mean, I have to say making it is a breeze in the sense because it's pretty pleasurable,
Right.
on that level.
Right. Well, I would like to see it. So
yeah, I look forward to showing. You'll definitely be one of the first people I'll get that cut. I'm almost there.
Okay.
I have to. Yeah, it's so hard though.
Yeah. If people want to find out more about your work or what you're doing, how can they do that?
Probably just going to the Decrim Instagram, Decrim SF Instagram. You could see those videos, or they're also on YouTube. And probably just like Googling my name, and you'd see the films and all that. I guess. I mean, I don't have I used to have, but I don't have anymore. Just like my own personal website. It's more for. There's one for the Cult of J.T. Leroy, and there's just my trail of activity out and about.
Well, that sounds wonderful. And I am very excited for you to finish this. And maybe once you're done, you can come back and tell us about the finished film.
Oh, thank you.
You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Remember to be in touch on my Facebook page, Art Heals All Wounds, and also on Twitter and Instagram at Art Heals Podcast. I'm so grateful to Marjorie for letting me interview her for this show. If you'd like to know more about Marjorie, you can Google Marjorie Sturm, MarjorieSturm, to get an overview of her work. Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. The music you've heard in this podcast is Yellow Light District and Autowaschenlage Instrumental by Lobo Loco. Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 15 in D major was performed by Karina Galanian. The special music and the intro of this podcast is by the artist Mon Plaisir.